Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is...
Dr. Paul, good morning.
What's your name again?
I forget.
Sorry about that, Daniel.
We had some tech problems starting out.
Yeah, too early in the morning. Okay, yes, Daniel is with us today. And,
sort of.
he never forgets anything, and that's why he's my co-host. But I want to talk today about... what's going on in Syria
yeah.
or what's not going on. Yeah. We've been holding out a little bit of hope that some good things would come out of Syria, but now we're not so sure what's going to happen. There's a reassessment, and today we want to talk about the oil. I remember when they were talking about going into war against Syria, the far left especially said it's all about oil, and we couldn't really disagree with them because it was a lot about oil. But I don't think we can say that this war in Syria, this thing that started with Obama, it was all about oil. A little bit of oil there, there's pipelines there and a few things like that, but it was all about something else going on there. But oil's in the news now because they do have a little bit of oil, and who gets to control the oil is pretty important. It has a lot of political significance and is enough there to help the Syrian people. But, they're arguing, whose oil is it? Are the Russians going to control it? Will the Iranians get hold of it somehow? Are the Kurds going to have it? But not too many people say, well, maybe Assad's going to get it. But Trump, chimed in. He said that he'll decide. I'll decide where the oil goes. And, his traditional statement generally has been that if we have to go into these places and we save them from themselves, then we'll take their oil and pay all the bills.
Yeah.
That's how we'll pay for these wars. That's a dream, that's a misconception, and there's not that much oil, but it's still significant because a lot of people are more paying attention to it, and we've even talked about this several years ago.
Yeah.
What's Trump want this oil for? Are they doing it for the oil? So this is something that I think is important, is going to be in the news, but I think this is indication that there's no reason to believe that we're really going to leave that country, let alone leave the countries where we have 200,000 troops.
Yeah.
We're not getting what we want. We want to change in foreign policy. We get teased with a little bit, and yet, lo and behold, there's a lot of factors involved. There's the neocons, there's the media, there's the wild left liberal Democrats who are just opposing because they're opposing Trump and all these features. So this is an important issue, and I think it's going to be in the news for a while. I don't think that we will be out of there completely, because if we don't get what we want, we will not be sending boots on the ground in there. We didn't do that so far, but we have a lot of other ways to deal with it. Everything from sanctions to bombs and threats and intimidation. So this we'll have to just keep an eye on.
Yeah, and we were cautiously optimistic yesterday when we talked about Trump's press conference, which literally took place just before we started. Of course, we were attacked in the comments, there you are supporting Trump again, which is, of course, not the case. We try to, we talked about before the show, baby steps. We'll congratulate baby steps. But we have to look at what's happening in the bigger context. Trump, when he announced this withdrawal, took it from all sides. And we contend that it was a smart choice, because our troops that were sitting there in the middle of everyone fighting, waiting to get shot, why not pull them out? He took it from the Democrats, of course, so no matter what Trump does, if Trump said free college tuition for America, they would say, how dare you do that?
Yeah, right.
So no matter what he does, they're attacking. A lot of Republicans who love war, who think we can never end wars, they hated him. The media, of course, hated him for a number of reasons. The only people who didn't hate the decision, and we talked about this on the show, were the American people. Republicans, majority of Republican voters were for it, and only a very small majority of Democrats were against it. Those you'd think that would really be against, only 53% were against it. So he is taking it from all sides, pulling out. Why do you think he made this kind of dumb statement? I'll be deciding what to do with the oil.
Right.
And so we think about, maybe it was a sop to these critics. Okay, I'm going to not be a complete withdrawal because that's weak, whatever. Don't forget Israel, Iran, Saudi Arabia. They want us to stay there and do all their fighting for them. And so that was not Iran, but Israel and Saudi Arabia do. The Iranians, we have to keep on their tail. The military-industrial complex, they're worried. So maybe this is kind of throwing a bone, but it's pretty irrelevant anyway, I think, at the end of the day. So we can talk about that.
Well, there's also another challenge about our hopes, and he's backed off, or he's done something that I think is not consistent with trying to get out of there, and that's this. It's a small amount of money, but it really is a bad sign. $4.5 million to the White Helmets.
White Helmets.
Oh, but the White Helmets are humanitarians, and
White
they're
hats.
trying, they're trying to help us to know what's going over there and who's doing the killing and what has happened there. But they're not. They're propagandists. They're propagandists for the far left, propagandists for the jihadists.
Yeah.
And it's pretty well settled that is the case. The evidence is very, very strong. But to do that, even if you're leaving, you wouldn't pick sides at all, and even if you thought one side was a little bit better than the other, but this is not there's no justification for this. So what is this? Is this the same old story that we just talked about on oil? Is he doing it because of the pressure, or is he doing it because nobody on his staff ever told him that there were questions with the White Helmets? We don't know that. But if you had a principled stand, you know that it's not their money to pass around. It's the taxpayers' money, and to just take even this amount. If you can take $4.5 million for this, that means you can take the billions and billions for doing all the other things because nobody asks any question. But this was a setback for our side, although small in dollar numbers. It's also an indication that somebody's not getting to Trump on giving him the right advice on these factions and who's running what.
Yeah, the White Helmets, they bill themselves as a rescue outfit. Actually, they're a filmmaking crew. What they do is they stage things that look like chemical attacks, and then they stage video of them rescuing people. They were founded by a British intelligence officer, so that should be the first cue that there's something really fishy about the whole thing. The UK and US government have given them hundreds of millions of dollars, and this is for an all-volunteer NGO, Dr. Paul. And you and I, we try to run the Ron Paul Institute, and can you imagine an all-volunteer and someone gives them $200 million bucks? So there's a lot of propaganda going on. It's not a lot of money compared to what they've been giving. So I guess Trump supporters would say, yeah, he just threw a bone. But our question, and we asked it before we started the show, is why does he seem so ill-informed? Why does he seem so ill-served by his subordinates that they would continue? This is an Obama policy. As you pointed out before the show when we were talking, 2014 is when they were founded by British intelligence. This is Obama's big thing. And unfortunately, we have a Trump tweet that's put up because probably a good time to talk about what you and I were wondering about. Here's poor old Trump yesterday. It's kind of pathetic if you think about it. It would be really great if the people within the Trump administration, all well-meaning and good, I hope, could stop hiring never-Trumpers who are worse than the do-nothing Democrats. Nothing good will ever come from them. This is probably the weirdest Trump tweet of all. Because,
who's doing the hiring?
Yeah, he's the boss. Can you imagine if you were in your office up on the Hill and you were tweeting out, I wish my staff wasn't so terrible. Please, someone help me. It's really kind of sad. And I, although, people would say he probably can't know all of these people everywhere.
And when you talk about the State Department at Foggy Bottom, and there were thousands of people, and there's always going to be some spy in there undermining you, but still, the people making the decisions should be responsible for all that. Trump's position has always been that going into these places is pretty bad, but at least we shouldn't ever have to pay for it. And, he's argued the case of using the oil, and that might, to pay the bills. It's sort of ironic. You invade a country, you destroy a country, you get their oil, and then you demand that they pay us for invading their country.
Thanks a lot.
But that might be a little bit of the reason, but he doesn't have real protection. He's inviting problems. If he thinks that he's going to make this declaration and everybody's going to leave him alone and he's going to get to take the oil and use it the way he sees fit, that's just not likely to happen. But there's another group that argues for staying there, although if they're from the left, they wouldn't give Trump any credit.
Yeah.
But they argue that you should hang around there and be careful and be aware if ISIS ever comes back again, that we're ready to go. And he more or less has said that. You know, we shouldn't go too far. That's why he was hoping he only had to go as far as Iraq, and then we'll be alert. But there's still going to be a couple hundred there. The principle is still there. The principle that we should intervene still exists, and it seems like when they try to change the position, unless it's a sharp decision that we don't believe that we should be there, or say, well, we should be there a little bit less, it doesn't accomplish what you want, because, oh yeah, you move this way, and then people forget, and oh, then there's an emergency. Al-Qaeda came in, and we'll have to go back in there. So we need to get it a lot further away than us sending a few troops into Iraq, who doesn't want us.
Doesn't want us. Yeah, they've had enough. They've been there, done that.
Right.
And here's what Trump said that was actually pretty smart, and of course he was attacked for it. He said, you know, Russia and Iran hate ISIS more than we do. And he said, how dare you say that? But it is the truth because of proximity. ISIS is not about to board a ship and come over and put some tanks and invade, Boston. It's not going to happen. However, if these guys get out of control, they are going to go north because they have a lot of sympathetic people in Chechnya, in other places in the Muslim weak flank of the Commonwealth of Independent States, the former Soviet Union. If these guys start percolating up toward Russia's belly, it's a real problem, and they have all the incentive in the world. The same with Iran. So this whole idea that they're going to sit back and watch 4 years of a lot of money and a lot of time in military going into Syria, Russia's going to sit back and let it all go back. I mean, Putin would have to be the stupidest person on earth. Thus far, he hasn't shown himself to be that.
Yeah, and they talk about these troops protecting oil or whatever. The one question that so many who support this to some degree, even some libertarian types will say, well, we can't just walk away, this sort of thing. What they don't realize is that the troops there cannot accomplish what they pretend they're going to accomplish. How many do you need? And that is something that I don't think the solution is going to easily be, that you just Mickey Mouse around here, moving troops here and there, and not ever change anything. So I think that's where the problem is basically, like we say so many times, is basically, how they look at foreign policy. Very few Americans would look at this as we so often do, and that is how, you already mentioned, the Russians are close there. They're allies. They have a base there, and they have an invitation. They're legal, under international law. But somebody would say, and we go and we are unwelcome. We're not legal under international law. And what would they say if the Russians were in Mexico? I mean, what would we say about that if they were doing all these things and securing all the bases and all the oils in Mexico? We would have a more legitimate concern because it's next door to our, our borders. But too many people say, oh no, we are exceptional and we know what's right. And right now there's a little bit of confusion because they always assume America is the greatest. We can deal with these things. But now that what Trump will say, we'll decide. Well, when he says, we'll decide what to do with the oil, he says, I'll decide what we'll do with the oil, which he's not quite capable of doing, to tell the truth. That for him to divvy up the oil or control those oil wells, that's not likely to really happen.
And conservatives and libertarians should know better because they know that the government can't even run things here. They can't even fix the doggone roads. But they're omniscient when it comes to doing things overseas. So I would just say on the specifics of we're going to stay there and guard the oil. And I'll close with this. It'll be a little long, but I'll close. The logistics of this are insane. It is not going to happen. And it's been reported extensively in the media, Forbes and elsewhere, that 1 gallon of fuel delivered to a forward operating base like he's proposing in Syria, 1 gallon of fuel to run the generators, because you got to have power over there, $400 a gallon. So if you talk about leaving 200 to 400 troops there, all power on those bases must be generated by generators, like 1,000 kilowatt generators, the smallest that you can have. You're talking about hundreds of gallons, maybe as much as 1,200 gallons of fuel a day. Keep those soda pops cool, keep the food hot, keep the guys from burning up in the heat. That is going to cost a fortune. You're talking maybe $500,000 a day to have these troops camped out in the middle of the desert between hostile forces on all sides. The oil in Syria is geographically dispersed very widely. So you're not going to have a big base in the middle saying we're going to watch it all. You're going to have little tiny camps, little tiny small bases here and there, totally vulnerable, in the middle of hostile territory. They have to be resupplied through unsecure roads. This is Moon of Alabama wrote about this and did a very good job. Unsecure roads. They would require 24/7 combat air patrols over them. You're talking about just keeping them there to watch the oil. Massive military operation. It's not going to happen. This is not going to happen. We're not going to see this. It's an indefensible position, legally, morally, financially, and in terms of strategy. I could be wrong, but I would say ultimately this is a sop. What Trump has said, when he looks at the numbers, it's simply not going to happen. Everyone's complaining that Trump all of a sudden wants to pull out. He said this back in December, a year ago, I want out. His people should have been planning for it then, and we probably would be completely out by now.
Very good. You know, I wanted to follow up on one statement you made there about the cost of oil, the $400 a gallon. And also, you know, there's been a lot of stories out over the years about how much a hammer would cost if you buy it from the military, hundreds of dollars. And also the airplanes that we buy and build and give to our enemies or our friends that are usually ends up using against us. And all this investment overseas. A lot of people have claimed, which I don't believe, that there's no inflation in this country. Well, the people out on the street know there's inflation because they can't afford a house. And the inflation is involved when we go overseas. And this sort of is symbolic of inflation. Buying stuff we don't even need. So it's malinvestment with huge inflation. And it contributes to the deficit of $1 trillion a year. So it is very, very important economically speaking. And this is something that if we don't get a handle on, we're going to face a major crisis. And the crisis may be beneficial because we can't afford this much longer. And this is something that has happened in the past, and people realize it usually a little bit too late. But right now there are a lot of signs and symptoms of us reaching a boiling point economically, financially, and in the area of the dollar value compared to other currencies. So I think we live in dangerous times financially. I think we live in dangerous times, for our economy here at home, instead of the bright reports that we get, as well as overseas, that there's these great victories that don't exist. So what we need to do is assess this, and guess what? We can come up with an answer that is not complex. It's a wonderful answer. It's something we've had for a long time. It has to do with what true Americanism should be all about, and that is peace and liberty and civil rights in the true sense of the word, private property ownership. These are the kind of answers that can solve the international problems. That is, you have to believe in trade, and you have to believe in non-intervention. You have to believe you're not an empire. Now there's a major challenge. And until we give that up, a lot of these problems can't be solved. But we are going to give it up, not because we all of a sudden got wisdom and we had a lot of more wise people in Washington and they vote this way. We're going to give it up because we're going to be broke, and we will have to give it up because you can't run it on an empty tank. But I know there's an answer out there, and I know a lot of Americans know it and understand it, but they are also very much influenced by the lies and the innuendos. I mean, just this whole thing of white helmets. Just think how the distortion there exists. Just think of the distortion in our public school system. Just think of the distortions on the evening news. Nobody believes it anymore, and yet they reign high in the agenda, and they can control it. And just think of how many lies have been told, and they're not just one party. all the lies that have been told since the beginning of the 2016 election. And it's ongoing, it's constant. It's almost like who can lie the most and the loudest, and who can be the last liar standing. Well, we need a change in that, and I think it will come, but we have to also know what we believe in. And it boils down to believing in liberty, believing that liberty will bring peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.